depression is something that all people experience from time to time. I mean, that's how we're made. We're made to feel sad when things, outside of ourselves or even inside of ourselves are not going particularly well.
I mean, I think it's kind of interesting that someone who's depressed, usually the first thing they do is they go to their family doctor, and the doctor who's got no training in mental illness of any kind writes them a script.
What you want to distinguish when a person comes in is whether or not the degree of depression that they're experiencing is enough to be considered clinically significant, which would mean that it is way more than the average person would experience under the same circumstances, to the point where it's debilitating them in some area of their life.
Depression. It's consuming, confusing, and scary. Addictive and undeniably disabling.
Imagine sitting in the forest, no sound except for your own breathing. It's freezing outside and it's so dark that you can't even see any trees that are further than 10 feet in front of your face.
There's so many different kinds of depression. There's major depression, there's bipolar depression, there's dysthymia. It goes on and on and on.
My first experience with depression was situational.
She held on for 3 hours before being pronounced dead at a hospital in Tacoma.
I just came back from the trial, outright guilty. It was shoplifting for a thrill.
I had been kicked out of a Christian organization for admitting that I was bisexual.
It started when my husband had left me for another woman.
I was a mess.
I crawled into the bottle to find the relief the only way I knew how, which made things worse.
I broke down. I felt as though the most positive thing in my life was taken from me over nothing more than a feeling.
I wasn't a strong person at that time. I had 10 years of dealing with my husband's lies and dishonesty that were well hidden for long periods of time.
I thought back on my day. I laughed. I smiled. I didn't feel anything, though. I couldn't feel anything, ever.
No one seemed to understand, and although people were there to listen, I felt alone.
My depression progressively got worse, sleeping all of the time, not sleeping at all, not getting dressed for days, feeling numb, crying.
Oh my God, I cried all the time.
I would fall into these states where I felt so disconnected, so numb, fucking alien.
As a young teenager, I'd run a razor blade up the inner part of my thigh to feel something. It was electrifying, almost orgasmic in nature.
I came to the point where I couldn't function. I began to self-medicate with alcohol.
My sons would come home from school and I would be passed out on the floor before dinner.
I cut myself, just a 3-second relief. The pain was overwhelming and addicting after not feeling anything at all for so long.
Eventually, the silence and numbness drive you mad.
Does depression change brain chemistry, or does certain brain chemistry have to be there in order to make someone more susceptible to depression?
Oftentimes we blame, the person that is suffering and put it on them that they're the ones responsible for making themselves feel better. That's not really correct thinking, and it certainly doesn't help the person experiencing it if they don't know what to do, or if they don't believe that what they do is going to make a difference.
I would really like to see the stigma lifted around not just depression, but mental illness in general in our culture, so that people don't have this shame about going and getting help.
I think another misconception, let's talk about suicide, is that it's the most selfish thing a person can do is to commit suicide. Not to mention all the religious things that we do to people in that regard, like you're going to go to hell if you commit suicide. Those thoughts are not very helpful to the person that's experiencing deep depression to the point of considering suicide. What I have recently come to understand is that for many people that get into a suicidal state, that it's not selfish. It appears to them with everything they believe that it's the most unselfish thing that they can do. And that thinking is definitely not what we want them to be thinking, but it's reality to them unless somebody can bring them out of that.
I convinced myself that I was entitled to end my life through a pragmatic and logical thought.
I didn't want to hurt the ones who loved me, but maybe they would see that I was ending a painful life that wasn't getting any better.
And that was it. I was done. I didn't want to live, but I didn't want to out and kill myself, knowing what that would do to my sons.
But I couldn't find a way out of the situation I was in, so I gave up.
I had sliced my forearm to the bone with a large serrated kitchen knife. Blood went everywhere.
I sat in the darkness listening to the rain, my wrists throbbing and my mind spinning so fast I felt like my body was too heavy to move.
I knew there was a loaded gun ready to be put to use.
Wash the pills down with a fifth of shitty vodka and remember thinking that the pain will stop.
And I wanted to stop the pain once and for all.
Her eyes and pain tones conveyed it all as she pulled my blood-soaked body into our apartment hallway that was filling with shocked neighbors, EMTs, blood, and cops.
As long as there are the misconceptions, the harmful misconceptions that people have, by all means. I mean, the only way to counter misconceptions is through education and understanding. But I think that the average person, if they don't know a lot about depression and they go read a book on it, you know, one person will be changed, the other person will say, see, I just knew it was something that's within the person's control. They could go get antidepressants, they could talk to a therapist, they don't have to sit there and wallow in it, which tells me that they don't have the empathetic understanding to take in the education so that they can use it appropriately if they themselves are depressed or if a family member or friend is depressed.
A person is a whole being. There's the spiritual part, the emotional part, the mental part, the physical part, and they all go together. And mind and body go together. You know, a lot of times in depression, you'll see things like fibromyalgia, for example, you know, one of the big physical symptoms, but there's so many other ones that get involved with depression.
The lowest, darkest night of my life landed me in the hospital for a month. I woke up in a room with bright white bandages covering my wrists and thighs, red seeping through.
I didn't wake up in heaven or hell, but on a cardboard box downtown near the train bridge.
I had a huge scrape on my face and a banana seat chopper bicycle that I must have grabbed along the way.
I became sick and went to the doctor, who was appalled at my condition, saying,
You weigh 73 pounds. Are you trying to kill yourself?
The emergency room mended my faucet with over 20 stitches, and after handing me a crisis hotline card, I was home 3 hours after the incident.
I didn't want to die, and the paralyzed feeling I felt the night before was terrifying. The idea that my suicidal thoughts could actually become a reality scared me.
People struggle with this, feel this way every day, but it's a silent struggle. It's not in your head, it's real.
Depression is way more serious than I think the general public understands. And it's always better to act proactively to help yourself or to help another person than it is to not react at all and watch the person drown.